I never thought that day would mark my end. And honestly, I never imagined how it could happen. I dedicated my life to the church, serving God through prayer and the sacraments, yet I didn't expect death to strike me with such sudden and ferocious force. The morning began like any other. I woke before dawn as always, kneeling by my bed for my morning prayers. For some time, my heart had been heavy with the state of the world, the unrest, the divisions, and even the growing tensions within the church itself. I'd spent countless hours praying for Pope Francis, asking for wisdom to guide him, strength to lead the faithful, and clarity in these troubled times. Yet, a strange unease lingered, like a sense of a coming storm I couldn't quite grasp. That morning, I followed my usual routine, prepared for Mass, reread the readings, and entered the sanctuary I'd known for so many years. As my feet touched the cold marble floor, a faint uneasiness washed over me. Nothing dramatic, just a slight discomfort, a touch of dizziness, like my heart skipped a beat. I dismissed it, trusting my generally good health and the day's duties to carry me through. Mass proceeded in its usual beauty. The congregation gathered, prayers rose like whispers to heaven, the Eucharist was received, and for a fleeting moment all felt sacred, untouched by the chaos outside. But as the service ended and I turned from the altar, the feeling returned, a sharp, crushing pain in my chest, like a fist clenching around my heart. I stopped, gripping the edge of a pew for support. The pain didn't ease. It intensified, spreading across my chest and radiating down my left arm. My breath grew short, and the room began to tilt, its edges blurring, as if reality itself was wavering. My vision dimmed, my legs gave way, and in an instant, the strength I'd always relied on vanished. I remember the moment my knees hit the floor. I heard someone call my name, but their voice was distant and muffled, as if I were already drifting away. Before darkness completely enveloped me, the last image I saw was the crucifix hanging above the altar, the figure of Christ looking down with a mixture of sorrow and love. Then everything went black. Yet I didn't simply fade away. I regained awareness, though I realized I was no longer contained within my physical body. At first it was a peculiar sensation, a state of weightlessness, a feeling of floating free from the constraints of flesh and bone. I perceived my surroundings not through eyes, but in a way that transcended ordinary senses. Sounds resonated without passing through ears. This experience was beyond the physical. It was something deeper, something truer. Looking down, I saw my lifeless body lying on the church floor, surrounded by onlookers. Some cried out my name, while others knelt in fervent prayer. Within moments, the scene shifted. Paramedics rushed in, their movements hurried and their voices urgent. One pressed his fingers to my neck and then shook his head, while another prepared a defibrillator, ready to shock my heart back into rhythm. I should have felt terror, watching my still body being fought over, yet I felt an immense sense of peace. Not the peace of quiet prayer or solitude, but something far more profound. It was as if all the weight of my earthly worries, my anxieties, and my struggles had been lifted, leaving behind only clarity and understanding. Then I sensed another force, a gentle pull that quickly grew stronger, as if some unseen power was drawing me upwards. The church, the paramedics, even my own body all receded, their sounds fading to a mere whisper as I ascended beyond everything familiar. The ceiling, which should have halted my ascent, was no obstacle. I passed through it effortlessly, as if the very laws of the physical world no longer applied. And then I encountered a light unlike any I had ever seen. It wasn't the light of the sun or fire, or the warm glow of a chapel candle. It was a living light, pulsing and breathing with an energy that radiated love, warmth, and truth. This light didn't just illuminate, it beckoned me closer. As I drew nearer, the feeling of weightlessness intensified, and I suddenly realized I was no longer rising within the confines of earthly space. I had entered a realm beyond time and sorrow, a place so profound that the very air seemed charged with a presence so intense that I fell to my knees in awe. I felt God's presence. I didn't see him directly, but his essence was everywhere, woven into every fiber of this place. Every part of my soul recognized him. I had spent my life praying, searching, and yearning for his closeness, and now I was here. Even in that moment of peace, immersed in overwhelming love, I felt something unexpected, a sense of urgency. I was here for a reason. Something important was about to happen. I opened my mouth to speak, even though I didn't know what to say. Before I could utter a word, I became aware of another presence. A figure emerged from the light, a figure I recognized even before his face came into focus. There was no need for introductions. My soul knew him instantly. Jesus. He stood before me, enveloped in a brilliant radiance that surpassed anything I had ever experienced. His light wasn't just a glow. It carried weight, authority, and a living, dynamic holiness, which wrapped around me like the presence I had longed for all my life. His eyes were unlike any I had ever seen, deep, expressive pools that held love, sorrow, wisdom, and power. They didn't just look at me. They truly saw me. Every thought, every feeling, every moment of my life laid bare. Overwhelmed, I fell to my knees. He looked at me not with judgment or disappointment, but with a love so profound it brought tears to my eyes. Then he spoke, with a voice that was more than just sound. It was the embodiment of truth, resonating within me and shaking me to my core. It was gentle, yet authoritative, tender, yet powerful. It is not your time yet. Those words carried a reality impossible to ignore. I blinked, trying to grasp their meaning. Not my time. Yet I had died. I had left my body. I had witnessed it all. Before I could ask any further questions, he continued, "I have something to show you." And with that, the light around me shifted. A new vision opened up. A revelation I was never meant to see, something the world wasn't ready for. In that moment, I understood why I had been brought here. A force far stronger than anything I had ever known propelled me upwards, not simply lifting me into the air, but carrying me through layers of existence, through realms unseen, yet undeniably real. The world I had known, the church, my body lying cold on the floor, receded into the distance like a fading dream. Before me stretched an endless tunnel of light, pulsating with an energy unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was a living, enveloping glow that filled me with warmth, peace, and an urgent beckoning. This journey was no ordinary passage. The atmosphere was charged, as if time itself had lost all meaning. I wasn't traveling through space as we know it. I was moving through something far greater. As I moved forward, I sensed a shift around me. The tunnel widened, expanding into an infinite expanse beyond human comprehension. The peace here was otherworldly, devoid of fear, pain, or doubt. Every burden I had carried, every worry that had troubled my heart, simply vanished, as if I had entered into the very presence of holiness. And then I realized I wasn't alone. From the radiance emerged a figure whose presence immediately brought me to my knees. I didn't need to ask who it was. My soul recognized Jesus the moment I saw him. My entire being trembled. His light wasn't just around him. It was part of him, flowing like a living presence, filled with power, authority, and an unfathomable love. His face, radiant beyond description, held both a deep sorrow and boundless compassion. When his eyes met mine, I felt known in a way I had never experienced before. He saw everything. Every secret thought, every whispered prayer, every struggle, failure, and moment of doubt. There was no hiding, no pretense, nothing left unsaid. He understood me completely, yet there was no hint of condemnation in his gaze, only pure, overwhelming love. A love so intense it almost crushed me. Tears streamed down my face as I bowed my head, overcome by the magnitude of his presence. I could barely breathe under the weight of it all. The air itself vibrated with an indescribable essence of holiness, truth, and eternity. I longed to speak, to confess my unworthiness, to admit how small I felt in the face of such divine glory. Before I could utter a word, he stepped closer. With a voice that transcended ordinary sound, a voice that was truth incarnate, he said, "There is something you must see." His words carried a gravity that transformed the space around us. I couldn't anticipate what would follow, but I felt a deep, aching urgency that something monumental was about to be revealed. The world unfolded before me, like an open book. Suddenly, I was floating in a place beyond space, looking at Earth from a view no human could ever imagine. It was like my soul could see past a curtain, past time and the tricks of earthly life. A huge area stretched out before me, and I saw churches scattered like stars in the night sky. Some shone brightly, their walls pulsing with warmth, and their sanctuaries echoing with prayers rising like golden incense. These churches were vibrant, not just buildings, but spiritually alive. They were shelters where God truly lived, where humble hearts found comfort. But not all churches shone with that holy light. Looking closer, I saw with a trembling heart that some churches, once full of bright holiness, now flickered dimly, their light barely visible under some unseen weight, while others were completely dark. Their grand walls seemed empty, and their decorated altars lacked true worship. A truth I felt deep inside. I had spent my life serving God, caring for his flock, and leading others in prayer, always believing the church was a strong beacon of truth. But in this special place, I saw what my human eyes had never fully understood. Many had turned away from him, even in his own house. I looked at Jesus, and when our eyes met, I saw in his gaze the sadness of a shepherd mourning his lost sheep. Then he spoke, "My church has forgotten me." His words echoed deeply, piercing my very being. They honored me by being spoken to me, yet they revealed that the hearts offering them were far from true devotion. I could barely breathe under the weight of that sorrow, a sorrow not my own, but his, the sorrow of a God who had given everything for his people, only to see so many distracted, misled, or uncaring. As my vision shifted back, I saw faces among the dim and darkened churches, countless souls whose eyes were empty as they sat in the pews, their prayers just going through the motions, their hearts absent. Others stood behind pulpits, giving sermons that sounded right, but lacked the true power, conviction, or anointing of a real relationship with God. They spoke of tradition and duty, but not of a living, personal connection with God. Then I noticed something else. The world outside these churches, out there, people wandered lost and searching. Some had been inside but left disappointed, while others had never entered, convinced there was nothing there for them. I saw the slow unraveling of faith, not in every soul, but in enough to change the very fabric of the world. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a few scattered churches losing their way. A figure emerged once more from the radiant glow, stepping forward with a presence so commanding that I fell to my knees. I didn't need to ask who it was. My soul knew instantly that it was Jesus. My entire being trembled as his light, an intrinsic part of him, flowed around and through him like a living force, filled with power, authority, and an unfathomable love. His face radiant and beyond description, held the expressions of deep sorrow and boundless compassion. As his eyes rested upon mine, I felt more understood than I had ever been before. He perceived every aspect of my existence, every silent thought, every whispered prayer, every struggle and failure. There was no hiding, nothing was left unexplored. Yet his gaze held no judgment, only an overwhelming love, a love so profound that it nearly broke me. Tears streamed down as I bowed my head, overcome by the weight of his presence. I could barely breathe in the immense holiness that surrounded us, an essence of truth and eternity itself. I longed to speak of my unworthiness, to confess how small I felt before such divine glory. But before I could, he reached out and, with a voice that was pure truth, said, "There is something you must see." His words, spoken not as commands but as undeniable reality, shifted the space around us. I felt a deep urgency, a profound and aching pull that something beyond my imagining was about to be revealed. The world unfolded before me like an open book. I found myself not on solid ground, but suspended in a realm beyond space, gazing upon the earth from a perspective no human could ever witness. It was as if my soul had been granted a vision beyond the veil, beyond time, and the deceptive illusions of mortal life. Before me stretched a vast expanse within which I saw countless churches scattered like stars across a boundless night sky. Some shone with an intense, radiant glow, their walls pulsing with life and their sanctuaries alive with the sound of prayers, rising like golden incense. Yet, many did not share this radiance. I saw churches whose divine light flickered faintly, dimmed by an unnamed weight, and others that had gone completely dark. In that moment I saw not only the splendor of true worship, but also the stark reality of its absence. The images of these dim and darkened sanctuaries, where hearts had turned away and worship had become empty, filled me with sorrow. It was clear that while some continued to bask in the glow of divine love, many had lost their way, an unraveling of faith that extended far beyond a few churches. It was a crisis that could reshape the world. In that sacred place, I felt the contrast between God's vibrant presence in some sanctuaries and the empty rituals in others. This experience made me realize that, even immersed in divine love, there was a call to rediscover true worship, to return to a genuine relationship with God that I had always sought. It was a spiritual earthquake, a transformation invisible to most, but with devastating consequences. I returned to Jesus with a broken heart. "Why?" I whispered. "How did we get here?" His face reflected pain and love. "Because they allowed the world to define them instead of seeking me. They built grand temples, but ignored the state of their hearts. They spoke my name, forgetting the sound of my call. I observed the trembling churches and the souls within them. Many were faithful, many still sought him sincerely, but too many were asleep, distracted, too comfortable in empty rituals, blind to how far they had strayed. Then Jesus reached out his hand, and I saw something that shook me to my core. I saw leaders, priests, bishops, even those in the highest positions of the church. Some were true shepherds, still fighting for their flock and firm in their faith. But others, their faces were clear. Something essential was missing. Some wore robes of authority but had no light in their eyes. Others spoke lofty words while their hearts were entangled in politics, power, and compromise. Some had begun in truth, but had grown weary, bending under the weight of a world that no longer desired God's truth. And, in the distance, right at the top, I saw a powerful figure shrouded in both light and shadow. I couldn't make out his face, yet my soul recognized him immediately. I gasped, "The Pope." Jesus' expression remained unchanged, but I felt a deep and overwhelming pain, but also hope in his presence. I wanted to ask, What does this mean? Is it a warning? A prophecy? But before I could speak, Jesus declared with firm resolve, "Pray for him. Pray for my church." In that moment I understood the church was at a crossroads. A hidden but palpable battle raged for its future, the outcome of which was still uncertain. My soul trembled when I realized why I had been brought here. This was more than a vision. It was a call to action, to pray, to awaken, to return to him before it was too late. The trembling churches, the lost souls, the weary leaders, there was still time. But that time was running out. I turned to Jesus, my voice trembling. What must I do? His eyes, full of love and urgency, met mine. There is more I must reveal to you. With these words, the vision shifted again. Suddenly, I found myself in a place I immediately recognized. The Vatican. The imposing beauty of St. Peter's Basilica stood before me, its intricate details glowing softly under an overcast sky. Yet something was different. A thick silence filled the air, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I walked forward hesitantly, unsure why I was there, and then I saw him. Pope Francis sat alone, his head bowed in deep prayer. His pure white robes seemed to weigh on his frail figure as if he carried a burden too heavy for one man. His hands trembled slightly in his lap, his breathing slow and measured. I could sense a weariness and pain in him that went beyond physical exhaustion. For a moment, I simply watched. The world knew him as the head of the Catholic Church, a shepherd revered by millions. Yet in that quiet moment he was just a man, carrying a weight that overwhelmed him. I looked at Jesus, standing beside me in radiant light, his face unreadable. "What's happening to him?" I whispered. Jesus' gaze remained fixed on the Pope as he answered, "The weight of the Church is immense," his voice calm, but filled with sorrow. My chest tightened. "Is he suffering?" Jesus turned to me, his eyes full of love and sadness. "Many of my shepherds are struggling. Some lead with integrity, while others have been led astray by the world." I swallowed hard. The urgency in his words was impossible to ignore. I glanced again at Pope Francis, his lips moving in silent prayer. Though I couldn't hear his words, I felt the depth of his plea. A deep cry for guidance and strength emanated from him. Then, as I watched, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy, and the Vatican itself seemed to waver, as if caught between two realities. Unnatural shadows crept along the walls, reaching toward the Pope like unseen hands. I held my breath. Something menacing pressed in on him. I turned to Jesus, alarmed, but he remained still, his gaze steady. "This battle is not against flesh and blood," he explained, "but against powers and principalities, against unseen forces, working both within and against my church." A deep clarity came over me. This was about something far greater than one man. I saw visions of secret conversations, powerful figures whispering decisions behind closed doors, influences pulling the church in different directions. Some hearts were sincere, earnestly striving to do God's will, while others were not. I witnessed the division. Within the church, some stood firm in truth, clinging to the teachings of Christ, while others began to compromise, not out of open rebellion, but out of fear, pressure, and deception. Desperate for clarity, I turned to Jesus once more. What does it mean? What is happening at the highest levels of the church? His face remained impassive, yet I felt the weight of his sorrow. "The church is my bride," he said, "but many no longer see me in her. Some seek power, others comfort, and still others strive to please the world instead of me." I shivered as his words pierced me. I looked again at Pope Francis. He continued to pray, still seeking God amidst the forces that pressed against him. Deep down, I felt that a momentous change was coming, a change that would impact not only him, but the entire church and the world. Jesus' presence beside me was like an anchor, steadying me against the onslaught of visions. "What are we to do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "How can we help you?" His eyes softened, though his voice remained resolute. "Pray. Pray for my church. Pray for your leaders. Pray for those trapped in deception, so they may find the truth before it's too late." I nodded, feeling a sense of urgency and responsibility growing inside me. I had always prayed for the church, but now I felt its importance like never before. Something was about to happen, and its future was uncertain. Then the vision shifted again, and I found myself no longer in the Vatican, but in a large hall of great importance, the name of which escaped me. Bishops, cardinals, and priests, men devoted to serving God, surrounded me. Their robes indicated their status, but their faces revealed deeper truths. Some looked troubled, some frowned as they argued amongst themselves, others were angry, gesturing sharply, with voices raised in frustration. And then there were those who sat in silence, their expressions unreadable as their eyes betrayed a disturbing hint of doubt. At first, I couldn't make out what they were debating, but gradually the words became clearer. One voice insisted, "The church must evolve with the times, we must modernize or we will lose the next generation." Another, calm but resolute, replied, "We do not alter the truth to fit the world. The world must come back to the truth." A third, tinged with frustration, added, "People are leaving. The church is losing its influence. We must do whatever it takes to stay relevant." I looked at Jesus, burdened by what I was sensing. "What is happening?" I asked. His expression remained steady, but his voice was heavy with sorrow. "The enemy seeks to divide and weaken my people. He sows doubt among my shepherds, turning them against each other and distracting them from my calling." I observed the men before me. Some were sincerely trying to do good and truly believed they were protecting the church. Yet I also saw confusion, fear, and, most dishearteningly, compromise. I saw doctrines debated not through prayer and discernment, but with political maneuvering. Decisions were guided by popularity rather than truth. I watched leaders weary from external pressures, not for lack of faith, but because the weight of the world's expectations was crushing them. They feared society's rejection. In that fear, some began to waver, some abandoned core teachings, softening their stance to appease the masses. Others remained silent when truth demanded to be spoken. And some went even further. I saw false teaching spread like a thick, deceptive smoke, creeping into churches and misleading even the faithful. They sounded holy, they sounded loving, but beneath it was a distortion of the gospel, a claim that God desires happiness above all else. They argued that all roads lead to the same truth, that sin is merely a matter of perspective. My heart pounded at such claims. "But, Lord, this is not what you taught," I protested. Jesus turned to me, his calm voice carrying undeniable authority. "My sheep recognize my voice." Those words struck deep. Not all would be deceived. I saw some priests and bishops stand firm, unwilling to compromise or let the truth be twisted. Yet some were ridiculed, even attacked by fellow clergymen. Some were ousted from their positions. I saw entire congregations divide, some embracing the truth, others choosing the path of least resistance. Then, with great sorrow, I saw people leave the church altogether. I saw some walk out for the last time, shaking their heads in disappointment. They had witnessed corruption, contradictions, and confusion, and instead of seeking Jesus, they chose to walk away from it all. My heart ached. I've seen good, devoted people lose their way because they looked to other people for answers instead of God. I turned to Jesus, my voice shaking, and asked, "How can we stop this? How can we bring them back?" His eyes, filled with sadness and love, met mine. "Prayer," he said. "Prayer is the weapon against deception. Prayer is the bridge that leads the lost back to me. My people must return, not just to rituals or tradition, but to me." I nodded as the weight of his words sank deep into my soul. I understood then. The church wasn't failing because God had abandoned it, but because so many within it had stopped seeking him first. The enemy's goal wasn't to destroy the church from the outside, but to break it apart from within, to drown people in politics, popularity, and the world's approval until they forgot the church's true purpose, to bring souls to Jesus Christ. I knew what had to be done. We must return to prayer. We must embrace the truth. We must stop putting our faith in people and put it back in God. And above all, we must not be deceived. I stood in silence as the vision shifted once more. Suddenly, I was no longer in that grand church debate hall, nor within the walls of a cathedral. I found myself instead in the middle of a vast battlefield unlike any I had ever imagined. The air was thick with tension, a dark fog cloaking the sky, swirling with an unnatural weight that pressed down like an unseen force. The battlefield stretched endlessly, filled not with armored soldiers, but with something far more profound. This wasn't a war fought with earthly weapons, but a battle of power, will, and truth against deception. Angels stood in shining armor, their very presence radiating authority and purity. They glowed with the light of heaven, piercing the darkness like burning flames. Some wielded fiery swords, while others carried shields that shimmered with divine brilliance. Then I saw their enemies. The forces of darkness were twisted, their forms shifting like smoke, grotesque, yet sometimes vaguely human. They muttered as they moved, their words seeping into the air like poison. I couldn't understand their language, but I felt the intent behind it: fear, doubt, confusion. They weren't just attacking with force. They were corrupting, spreading deceit, poisoning minds, and influencing the world in unseen ways. And then, with a horrifying realization, I saw that they were attacking the church. I turned to see it. The church stood in the heart of the battlefield, not as a building, but as a spiritual presence embracing the earth, now under siege. Darkness pressed in from all sides, a suffocating shroud around it. I saw entire congregations being swallowed, not by physical ruin, but by an insidious spiritual decay. Compromises, twisted teachings, fear and division were infecting them like a slow, deadly poison. I wanted to cry out, to rush forward and stop what was unfolding, but then something caught my eye and stole my breath. A spark of light. At first it appeared as a small, flickering flame, barely holding its own against the encroaching darkness. But with a closer look, I understood its nature. It was prayer. Amid the chaos of the battlefield, small groups of people knelt together, hands clasped and voices raised, not in terror, but in unwavering faith. Their words blazed upwards like fire, cutting through the darkness. The very moment their prayers ascended, something extraordinary happened. The angels seemed to gain strength. Every heartfelt plea to God sent flashes of light. These weren't empty rituals or repeated phrases. These were heartfelt cries, uttered by desperate souls seeking truth and by believers sincerely seeking Jesus. With each prayer, the shadows recoiled. The demons shrieked as the pure light burned them. The whispers of lies disappeared when faced with the power of truth. I saw churches, once weak and shaky, suddenly light up with holy fire. Their brightness spread, their faith came alive again. At that moment I understood. The church wasn't hopeless. The enemy couldn't completely destroy it, but he was determined to corrupt it from the inside, to damage its very heart, and make the followers forget the power they had. I turned to Jesus, my voice shaking, and asked, "What should we do?" His eyes, full of pain and hope, met mine. "The church will resist," he said, "but only if my people pray." His words echoed deep within my soul. This battle wasn't just for the priests, the bishops, or even the Pope. It was a fight for every believer. Though fought in unseen places, its effects rippled out to every church, every home, every heart on earth. I looked back at the chaos. The darkness still raged, still tried to swallow everything. Yet now I saw hope. As long as believers prayed with sincere hearts, not just with words, the darkness could never win. But we had to wake up. We couldn't be passive bystanders anymore. We had to fight back, not with anger or arguments, but with prayer, truth, and an unshakable faith. Standing there as the battle unfolded before me, I realized the outcome was far from certain. The church would remain, but whether it would stand strong or crumble depended on us. Then the vision shifted, and I found myself on the edge of something immense, something beyond time and space. Jesus was beside me, his presence constant, his gaze filled with both sorrow and hope. I wasn't sure where I was, but I felt the weight of what was about to be revealed. The air around us was thick with an unseen power. We were being presented with a choice. Then Jesus raised his hand, and instantly, two paths opened up. On the first, I saw a church reborn. It wasn't perfect. No human institution is. But it pulsed with life. I saw congregations gathered not out of duty, but with a real hunger for truth. People prayed with fiery passion, their voices piercing the darkness. I saw young and old seeking Jesus, not just going through old rituals, but truly encountering him. In these churches, a brilliant light radiated warmth, extending beyond the walls to touch lost hearts. Leaders humbled themselves, shifting their focus from status and power to Jesus alone. The distractions, divisions, and political games that had crept into the faith were cast aside. Revival swept across the land, not in just one place, but all over the world. Nations that had grown cold turned back to God. I saw communities transformed, families reunited, lives changed not by force or fear, but by love and truth. Then the vision shifted, and my heart ached as I turned to the second path. This was the church that had grown weak, the one that had allowed deception to creep in deep. I saw empty pews, once thriving cathedrals now covered in dust, and churches reduced to social halls, stripped of their power, their holiness, and their purpose. Leaders no longer preached truth, but offered what was easy, what pleased the world. I saw people once strong in faith fall into confusion, trading their convictions for comfortable ideologies. This weakened church existed, but it held no real strength, a church that had compromised too much. It was a church that had tried so hard to gain the world's acceptance that it had forgotten its true mission. And, in its weakness, darkness had spread. Without a vibrant church, people wandered, lost and searching. I turned back to Jesus, the weight of this choice heavy upon me. "Which path will we take?" I asked, my voice trembling. He paused, looking deep into my soul, then said, "That is for my people to decide." His words struck me like lightning. Nothing was set in stone. This was a choice. The church wasn't doomed, but it wasn't automatically safe either. What I saw wasn't a prediction, but a possibility. Then Jesus spoke again, with a tone of sacred urgency. "Put your trust not in men, but in me. My word is unchanging." In that moment, everything became clear. The church was never meant to rest on the strength of human leaders. It was founded only on Christ. Hopes may falter. Bishops may rise and fall. Leaders may be righteous or corrupt. But the foundation of the church, Jesus himself, never wavers. The real problem was that people had put their faith in men rather than in God. Many had grown lukewarm, clinging to tradition instead of truth, practicing religion without a true relationship. And that's why the church now stands at a crossroads. If my people, the body of Christ, do not awaken, if they continue to rely on human leaders rather than on Jesus himself, the church will weaken and the world will suffer. But if they return to Jesus, if they pray fervently, if they seek truth and reject compromise and deception, then the church will be renewed. This is the mission Jesus entrusted to me. I must awaken the people. I must warn them that their faith cannot depend on leaders, positions, or titles. It must be rooted only in Jesus and his word. I looked at the two paths one last time, the renewed church versus the weakened church. The choice was clear. But would the people choose wisely? In an instant, everything changed, the weight of Jesus' words still deeply etched within me. Before I could even speak, before I could beg to stay, I felt a gentle but firm force pulling me, drawing me away from Christ's radiant presence. My heart ached at the thought of leaving, of returning to a world that now seemed so distant. I turned to Jesus, desperation trembling in my voice. Please, let me stay. His eyes, deep and filled with a love beyond anything I had ever known, met mine. There was sorrow there, but also a clear purpose. It is not yet your time, he said. Those words settled upon me like an immutable decree. I had no choice. Yet, my soul yearned to remain in this sanctuary of peace, truth, and overwhelming love. How could I go back? How could I return to a world where people were lost, where deception reigned and faith was fading? My voice trembled as I pleaded, I don't know if they'll believe me. I don't know if I can do this. Jesus stepped closer, his presence filling every fiber of my being. He placed a hand on my shoulder, and in that touch, every doubt and fear vanished. You are not responsible for who believes, he said. You are only responsible for speaking the truth. I desperately wanted to cling to him, to defy the force pulling me away, but it was too late. I felt myself being drawn back, falling swiftly and uncontrollably, as if swept away into space itself. The warmth of his presence faded, the brilliant light dimmed, and then came darkness. A suffocating silence enveloped me, and then a sound. A piercing beep filled my ears. A rush of air hit my lungs like fire. My body convulsed, as if jolted back to life. My chest burned, my limbs felt like lead, and a sharp pain shot through me, reminding me that I was human again. I was back. Blurred figures hovered over me, voices shouting with frantic urgency. He's back! We have a pulse! I gasped, choking as the weight of my body returned, slamming me back into the confines of flesh and bone. The harsh, white lights above me seemed alien and sterile, nothing like the radiant glow I had just left. The cold air sent shivers down my spine. I could hear the whirring of equipment, the steady beeping of machines, and the hurried footsteps of doctors and nurses. My world crashed down in an instant. A doctor came closer, looking stunned. "We lost him," he murmured, like he couldn't believe it. "He's breathing." "He's breathing," he said. I tried to answer, but my throat was dry, my body weak, and my arms and legs were shaking like they weren't mine anymore. I turned my head a little, trying to focus and understand what happened. Was it all real? Was I really just with Jesus? Did I really see the battle for the church, the sneaky trickery? Then, like a flood, it all came back to me. The vision of the church, the lies, the urgent warning in his voice, and most of all, his last words. "You have to go back. You have to tell them what you saw." I tried to get up, but gentle hands pushed me back, down. "Rest, Father," a nurse said kindly but firmly. "You need time to recover." But I didn't have time. I had to talk. I forced the words out, a faint whisper. "I have to tell." The doctor frowned. "Tell who?" I swallowed hard, my throat parched. But I managed to croak, "Everyone." At that moment, I knew I could never go back to my old life. I had seen the truth, and I had to share it. When I finally left the hospital, everything seemed different. The outside world, the same sky, the same streets, the same buildings, looked unchanged. But I wasn't the same. I couldn't be, because I had seen too much. For days, I struggled to find the words to describe what happened. I even questioned myself. Was it real? Was I really in the presence of Jesus? Did I really see the battle raging over the church, the deception creeping into the hearts of believers? Or was it all a feverish dream, a hallucination brought on by my sick heart? As much as I tried to explain it away, the truth was undeniable. It was real, more real than anything I'd ever known. The weight of Jesus' words pressed down on my soul with an urgency I couldn't ignore. I was sent back for a reason. At first, I didn't know how to begin. How do you share something so profound? How do you explain a vision so powerful and urgent when the world is too distracted, too wrapped up in its own mess to listen? Then I remembered Jesus. You are not responsible for who believes. You are only responsible for telling the truth. And so I started talking. I told my fellow priests what had happened. Some listened with wide eyes, nodding reverently as their hands trembled with conviction. Others dismissed it with kind smiles and skeptical glances. One even remarked, "Near-death experiences can be powerful, but sometimes they're just the mind's way of dealing with trauma." I sensed their doubt, but I knew the truth. I went beyond the church walls. I spoke to my congregation, to friends, to anyone who would listen. I told them what I had seen, the subtle deception creeping into the church, the false teachings, the way so many had lost sight of Christ in favor of empty rituals and traditions. I warned them that prayer was far more powerful than they imagined. I had seen with my own eyes how the prayers of the faithful ignited a light that pushed back the darkness and held back destructive forces. I urged them to bring the church back to Jesus, not as mere tradition or ceremony, but as a true encounter with him. Faith isn't about rules, status, or empty words. It's about knowing Christ, following his voice, and walking in his truth. I even spoke of Pope Francis, of the heavy burden he carried, of the struggles within the Vatican, of the urgency of our time. Whether he was a righteous shepherd or influenced by worldly pressures was not for me to judge. But I knew one thing for sure. He and all our religious leaders needed our prayers. This was a critical time for the church, a crossroads. I saw the deception spreading like a shadow across the world, both outside and within the church. Some leaders were guiding their flocks with integrity, but others had been led astray. The enemy seeks to divide my people. Jesus' warning echoed in my mind. I saw believers arguing over doctrine, over leadership, over the future of the faith, while the real battle raged unseen. And so, I kept speaking. Some believed me right away. I saw both fear and hope in their eyes, the hope that there was still time to turn back and reclaim what had been lost. Others scoffed, dismissing me as just another priest with outlandish claims, even implying that I was making it all up. "The church has been through worse," they quipped. "We don't need the warnings of a priest who almost died." I felt only sorrow, not anger, because they couldn't see what I had seen. This time was different, exactly as Jesus intended. Some would listen, some wouldn't. But we must try. Now I pray with more intensity than ever, and I urge everyone to do the same. I invite every believer to stay anchored to the truth, not in the words of men, but in the Word of God. I warn you, do not be deceived. This isn't about fear, but about choice. A future of renewal is still possible, but only if we return to God now. So I leave you with this message: don't wait until it's too late. The time to return to God is now. Pray, seek the truth, and stand firm in your faith. If this message touches you, share it. Spread the warning, subscribe to the truth, and stay watchful. The days ahead will test our faith, but those who remain in Christ will not be shaken. God bless you.